They say you can tell everything about a person's true character by the way they treat someone they think is beneath them. For 3 long years, I lived in a quiet, subtle shadow, watching a family of immense wealth look down at me like I was a piece of dust they forgot to sweep off their polished marble floors. I never fought back. I never raised my voice. I just smiled, held my fiancé's hand, and waited. Because the funny thing about arrogance is that it makes people completely blind to the trap they are digging for themselves. My name is Leo. I am 28 years old, and if you saw me on an ordinary day, you would think I was just an average guy trying to make it in a big, expensive city. I wear simple, casual clothes. I drive a modest 10-year-old sedan that makes a slight rattling noise when it idles too long at a red light. I work as an independent digital consultant, a job that allows me to work from a laptop in the corner of quiet coffee shops. To the outside world, and especially to my future in-laws, I was a nobody, a boy from nowhere with nothing to his name. And then there was Clara. Clara was the light of my life. We met at a public library 3 years ago, both reaching for the exact same book on architectural history. She was kind, down to earth, and completely unbothered by material things. When we fell in love, she didn't care that I took her to small local diners instead of 5-star restaurants. She loved me for who I was. But Clara came from a world that was completely different from mine. Her father, Richard Sterling, was a legendary real estate tycoon in the city. He was a man whose name was plastered across luxury apartment complexes and corporate high-rises. Richard was an intimidating, cold individual who measured a human being's worth strictly by the number of commas in their bank account. To him, his daughter was a prize, a royal asset that was supposed to be traded for a strategic alliance with another billionaire family. When Clara told him she was marrying a regular middle-class consultant, Richard didn't just disapprove. He treated it like an act of open rebellion. For months, every single family gathering was a masterclass in psychological humiliation. Richard, along with Clara's snobbish mother Beatrice, would drop constant, biting remarks. At the dinner table, Richard would ask me about my little internet hobby, laughing condescendingly when I explained my consulting business. Beatrice would loudly lament in front of the relatives that Clara wouldn't be having a traditional society wedding because some people simply cannot afford the registry at St. Jude's Cathedral. I endured all of it. I swallowed my pride, kept my composure, and looked down at my plate. Clara would constantly apologize to me in the car on the way home, her eyes filled with tears. "I am so sorry, Leo," she would sob, clutching my arm. "My father is a monster. We don't need his approval. We don't need his money. I just want to be with you." I would always kiss her forehead and smile warmly. "Don't worry about it, honey," I would tell her gently. "Words can't hurt me. As long as I have you, nothing else matters." I meant it. I truly didn't care about their insults. But Richard Sterling wasn't satisfied with just verbal abuse. He wanted to break me. He wanted to force me to run away so he could regain complete control over his daughter's future. The crisis point arrived on a cold Friday evening in November. Clara and I had been engaged for just 2 weeks. Out of nowhere, Richard called Clara and invited both of us to a private dinner at the Grand Meridian Hotel, the most exclusive, historic 5-star hotel in the heart of the city's financial district. It was a place where heads of state, celebrities, and old money billionaires stayed. A single dinner there cost more than most people made in a month. "He wants to celebrate our engagement, Leo," Clara told me over the phone, her voice sounding incredibly excited and hopeful. "He said he wants to put all the past tension behind us and welcome you into the family properly. Do you think he's finally changing his mind?" I looked out the window of my small apartment, watching the rain slide down the glass. I knew Richard Sterling. Men like him don't change their minds. They don't have sudden awakenings of generosity. A private dinner at the most expensive hotel in the city wasn't an olive branch. It was a setup. It was a stage carefully chosen to maximize his leverage and display his overwhelming dominance. "Of course, sweetie," I told Clara smoothly, masking the ice-cold suspicion building in my chest. "Tell him we will be there at 7 p.m. sharp. I'll wear my best suit." I hung up the phone, walked over to my closet, and looked at the single, neatly pressed charcoal suit hanging inside. I ran my fingers over the fabric. Then I sat down at my desk, opened a secret drawer, and pulled out a small, heavy silver keychain with an elegant, engraved crest on it. I stared at it for a long time under the dim desk lamp. Richard Sterling thought he was the undisputed king of the city. He thought his wealth gave him the right to play God with people's lives. He had no idea that the quiet boy driving the rattling sedan was about to introduce him to a level of power that would leave him completely speechless. Section C. The ambush at the 5-star table. The Grand Meridian Hotel was breathtaking. As my modest car pulled up to the grand entrance, the gold-uniformed valets looked at my vehicle with a mixture of confusion and subtle disdain. I didn't care. I handed the young man the keys, took Clara's hand, and walked through the massive gilded glass doors. The lobby was a cathedral of old-money luxury. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden glow over the polished white marble floors. A live string quartet played softly in the corner, the classical music echoing off the wood-paneled walls. We were led by a pristine, bowing maitre d' into a private glass-walled dining room overlooking the hotel's spectacular indoor botanical garden. Sitting at the center table, looking like a king reviewing his subjects, was Richard Sterling. Beside him sat Beatrice, draped in expensive diamonds that caught the light every time she moved her head. "Ah, Clara, my beautiful girl," Richard boomed, standing up to kiss her cheek. When he turned to me, his expression instantly flattened into a cold, transactional stare. He didn't offer his hand. He simply nodded curtly. "Leo, sit. Let's get started. We have a lot to discuss tonight." As we sat down, a team of waiters immediately began pouring expensive champagne and laying down pristine crystal plates. For the first 20 minutes, Richard played the part of the gracious host. He talked about his latest multi-million-dollar high-rise project, bragging about how he had just secured a massive zoning permit from the city council. Beatrice chimed in, talking about her upcoming charity gala. Clara relaxed, visibly relieved, thinking that the nightmare was finally over. But I remained completely vigilant. I noticed that Richard hadn't looked me in the eye once. He was waiting. Just as the main course was served, Richard slowly reached into his breast pocket. The warmth completely vanished from the room. He pulled out a thick, leather-bound document and slid it across the white tablecloth, letting it land with a heavy, deliberate thud right next to my water glass. Clara's smile instantly froze. "Dad? What is that?" Richard took a slow, deliberate sip of his vintage wine, wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, and leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine like a hawk targeting a mouse. "This, Leo, is the reality check," Richard said, his voice dropping into a low, clinical tone. "This is the prenuptial agreement for your marriage to my daughter, and before you open your mouth, let me tell you that it is non-negotiable." Clara reached for the document, but Richard snapped his fingers sharply. "Don't touch it, Clara. This is between me and your future husband. If he wants to be part of this family, he needs to understand the rules." I calmly reached out, pulled the thick leather folder toward me, and opened the first page. As my eyes scanned the legal clauses, a cold fury began to brew deep inside my chest. It wasn't just a standard prenuptial agreement to protect existing family assets. This was what my industry legally referred to as a poverty clause prenup. The terms were intentionally, maliciously brutal. According to the document, in the event of a divorce, for any reason whatsoever, I would waive all rights to any marital assets, any future property, and any financial support. But it went much further than that. The clause explicitly stated that if Clara and I separated, I would be legally forced to repay the Sterling estate for every single dollar spent on our wedding, every dinner we had ever attended with them, and a calculated occupancy fee for any time I spent living in any property associated with their family name. Furthermore, it stated that I would immediately surrender custody of any future children to the Sterling family, under the legal definition that my income status would constitute an unstable environment. It wasn't a legal protection document. It was a financial collar designed to turn me into a permanent, terrified servant who could be thrown out onto the street with a massive debt at any moment Richard pleased. "Dad! This is sick!" Clara screamed, standing up from her chair, her face turning bright red with anger. "You are insulting Leo. You are treating him like a criminal. We are not signing this." "Sit down, Clara," Richard roared, his powerful voice cutting through the private room like a whip. "You are a child." "You don't understand how the world works. This boy has nothing. He is a parasite trying to latch onto our family name so he can fund his little internet consulting dream." If he truly loves you for you, as he claims, then he won't mind signing a document that guarantees he leaves with exactly what he brought into this marriage, which is 0. Beatrice chuckled softly, swirling her champagne. Listen to your father, Clara. We are simply ensuring that your future isn't ruined by someone who belongs in a completely different social class. Richard leaned in closer to me, a malicious, triumphant smirk stretching across his face. He knew he had me cornered. He knew that to a regular guy, this document was absolute ruin. Sign it right now, Leo, Richard commanded, sliding a heavy gold pen across the table. Or the wedding is cancelled. I will cut Clara off completely. I will pull her trust fund. I will evict her from her apartment. And I will ensure that your little consulting business loses every single client in this city. I have the power to erase you, boy. Make your choice. Clara looked at me, tears streaming down her face, shaking her head. Don't sign it, Leo. Let's just walk out. We can leave the city. We don't need them. I looked at the gold pen. I looked at Richard Sterling's arrogant, smug face. He thought he was the ultimate predator. He thought he was the heaviest force in the room. I slowly closed the leather folder, leaned back in my chair, and let out a soft, relaxed laugh. The entire table went dead quiet. Richard's smirk faltered, his eyebrows knitting together in deep confusion. What are you laughing at, boy? I'm laughing at how incredibly small your world is, Richard, I said, my voice completely calm, steady, and devoid of any fear. You think this hotel, this money, and your little buildings make you a god. You think you can threaten me? How dare you! Richard began to roar, slamming his fist on the table. But before he could finish his sentence, the heavy wooden doors of the private dining room swung open. The pristine maitre d' rushed in, his face completely pale, his hands trembling as he stood aside. Ladies and gentlemen, I am so sorry to interrupt, the maitre d' stammered, his voice shaking violently. But the primary owner of the hotel group has just arrived on the premises for an unannounced global inspection. He requested to speak with the occupants of this private suite immediately. Richard instantly stood up, his anger transforming into a look of deep corporate panic. The Grand Meridian Hotel was owned by the Vance Hospitality Syndicate, a global, multi-billion-dollar conglomerate that made Richard's local real estate company look like a backyard lemonade stand. Richard had been trying to secure a meeting with the Vance family for 3 years to pitch a joint venture, but they had always ignored his calls. The owner? Richard gasped, quickly straightening his tie and smoothing his suit. Charles Vance is here? In person? No, sir, the maitre d' whispered, bowing his head deeply as a tall, imposing figure in a flawless, bespoke Italian suit stepped into the room. The founder and global chairman, Mr. Arthur Vance. Section T. The king enters the room. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. It was as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the space. Arthur Vance was a man who exuded an undeniable, quiet authority. He had silver hair neatly combed back, piercing gray eyes that had commanded boardrooms across Europe and Asia for 4 decades, and a presence that made even the room's elegant crystal chandeliers seem dim by comparison. 2 sharp, silent security details stood guard at the doorway, their hands folded neatly in front of them. Richard Sterling looked like a schoolboy who had just been called into the principal's office. His previous roaring arrogance completely vanished. He scrambled out from behind the table, nearly knocking over his wineglass in his haste, and rushed forward with his hand extended, a desperate, sycophantic smile plastered across his face. Mr. Vance, what an absolute honor, Richard gushed, his voice practically trembling with artificial warmth. My name is Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Holdings. I have been trying to reach your corporate office in London for months regarding the downtown harbor development. I cannot tell you what a privilege it is to meet you in person in your beautiful hotel. Arthur Vance stopped. He looked at Richard's extended hand for 3 agonizing seconds. He didn't take it. Instead, he slowly raised his eyes, ignoring Richard completely, and scanned the private dining room. When his eyes landed on me, sitting quietly in my chair with my hands folded, a warm, genuine, and incredibly deep smile broke across the old billionaire's face. Hello, son, Arthur Vance said, his booming, cultured voice filled with an immense fatherly pride. I hope I'm not interrupting a private celebration. The entire room froze. Richard Sterling's extended hand remained stuck in the air, his jaw completely dropping as his eyes darted from Arthur Vance to me, and then back again. Beatrice choked on her champagne, coughing violently into her napkin. Clara gasped, her hands flying to her mouth in absolute shock. I slowly stood up from my chair, adjusted the cuffs of my simple charcoal suit, and walked over to the global hotel tycoon. I reached out and we shared a warm, powerful embrace. "You're right on time, Dad," I said, a cold, sharp smile finally forming on my face as I turned to look at my future in-laws. "In fact, your timing couldn't be more perfect." Arthur Vance pulled back, patting my shoulder affectionately before turning his piercing gray gaze onto Richard Sterling, who looked like he was about to faint. "Mr. Sterling," Arthur Vance said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous rumble that sent a visible shiver down Richard's spine. "It seems there has been a massive misunderstanding here tonight. You see, my son Leo here prefers to live a quiet life. He wanted to build his own independent consulting business from scratch, without using the family name or relying on my global assets. He wanted to find a woman who loved him for him, not for the Vance fortune." Arthur walked over to the table, his eyes locking onto the thick leather folder containing the Poverty Clause prenuptial agreement. He slowly picked it up, flipped through the pages for a few seconds, and let out a cold, disgusted sigh. "A poverty clause?" Arthur whispered, his voice dripping with pure, unyielding venom. "You looked at my son, the primary heir to the entire Vance Hospitality global empire, a man who will inherit 42 five-star hotels, 3 luxury cruise lines, and a real estate portfolio that could buy your entire company 10 times over, and you treated him like a street beggar trying to steal your daughter's trust fund?" Richard Sterling's face turned an unnatural, sickly shade of white. Sweat began to pour down his forehead, soaking through his expensive collar. He looked at me, his chest heaving, his voice coming out in a desperate, high-pitched stammer. "Leo, I didn't know," Richard pleaded, his hands shaking violently as he took a step back. "You drive a 10-year-old car. You live in a regular apartment. You never told us. If I had known who your father was, if I had known your family background, I would never have. Please, Mr. Vance, this was just a massive mistake. We can rewrite the agreement. We can discard it entirely." "Oh, I'm sure you would have behaved differently if you knew I had money, Richard," I said, stepping forward, my voice completely ice-cold. "But that's the whole point, isn't it? You only treat people with respect if you think they have the power to destroy you. If you think someone is weak, you treat them like garbage. You tried to cage me, you tried to threaten my livelihood, and you threatened to take away my future children." I reached onto the table, picked up the heavy gold pen Richard had slid toward me earlier, and tossed it into the trash can in the corner of the room. "The time for negotiations is over, Richard," I said smoothly. "You wanted to show me how the world works? Well, now it's my turn to show you." Section: The Execution of Absolute Justice. Arthur Vance turned to his chief security officer and raised a single finger. "Get the regional vice president of operations on the line immediately, and tell our global legal counsel to initiate Protocol 9 regarding all active contracts associated with Sterling Holdings." Richard's eyes widened in pure terror. "Protocol 9? Mr. Vance, please, what does that mean?" Arthur Vance didn't even look at him as he spoke to his assistant. "It means, Mr. Sterling, that as of 9 o'clock tonight, your company is completely blacklisted from every Vance property and subsidiary worldwide. Furthermore, I happen to know that your current multi-million-dollar high-rise project downtown is built on land leased from a primary corporate trust, a trust that my family happens to hold the controlling shares of." Arthur finally turned his gaze back to Richard, his eyes cutting through him like steel. "Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., our legal team is filing an immediate structural injunction against your zoning permits for breach of environmental safety standards. We are pulling the lease, Richard. Your project is shut down." "No! You can't do that!" Richard shrieked, completely losing his composure, stepping forward like a desperate man on the edge of a cliff. "That project is 70% of my company's net worth. If you pull that lease, the banks will call in my loans. I will be completely ruined. I'll lose everything." "Then I suggest you start packing your boxes," I told him coldly, stepping in front of my father. "Isn't that what you told me? That you have the power to erase me? You played your hand, Richard. Now you have to live with the consequences." Beatrice stood up from her chair, her face twisted in a mask of panic as she grabbed her husband's arm. Clara, do something. Speak to your fiancé. Tell him to stop this. We are your family. Clara, who had been standing quietly by the window, slowly wiped the remaining tears from her eyes. She looked at her mother, then at her father, and for the first time in her life, her face was completely devoid of fear. She saw them for exactly what they were, playground bullies who had finally run into the principal. Leo didn't ruin you, Mom. Your own disgusting greed did, Clara said, her voice filled with a calm, beautiful strength. For years I watched you humiliate every good person who ever walked into my life. You thought your money made you untouchable. Well, tonight you found out you are completely powerless. I am marrying Leo, and as of tonight, I am officially changing my last name to Vance. I never want to see either of you again. Clara walked over to me, took my arm, and looked up at me with a smile filled with absolute pride and love. Richard Sterling sank into his chair, his head falling into his hands as he let out a broken, hollow sob. The great real estate tycoon had been completely dismantled in less than 5 minutes, stripped of his power, his pride, and his future fortune, all because he couldn't resist the urge to stomp on a boy he thought was poor. Arthur Vance smiled warmly at Clara, bowing his head respectfully. Welcome to the family, my dear. You are a woman of exceptional character. Now, if I'm not mistaken, our dinner here has been completely ruined by bad company. What do you say we leave this place and go get some real food? I know a fantastic local diner just 5 minutes away, Dad, I said with a laugh, looking down at the broken man at the table one last time. They make the best burgers in the city. And the best part? They don't require a prenuptial agreement to sit at the table. As we walked out of the private dining room, leaving Richard and Beatrice alone in their golden, ruined silence, the heavy glass doors closed behind us, shutting down that chapter of disrespect forever. Section TA. The Wealth of the Heart. It has been 2 years since that spectacular night at the Grand Meridian Hotel, and the city's skyline has changed in ways that few people could have predicted. If you drive down to the financial district today, you won't see Richard Sterling's luxury high-rise complex. The concrete foundations he poured were abandoned after his company collapsed into a massive, historic bankruptcy 3 months after our dinner. The banks repossessed his corporate assets. His wealthy society friends completely vanished the moment his name became radioactive, and he was forced to liquidate his family mansion to pay off his remaining legal debts. Today, Richard and Beatrice live in a modest, rented townhouse in a quiet suburb, completely stripped of the corporate empire they used to terrorize people with. But Clara and I didn't focus on their ruin. We focused on building our own life. We were married in a beautiful, quiet ceremony in a small botanical garden, surrounded only by people who truly loved and respected us. My father, Arthur, stood by my side as my best man, wearing a simple smile that held more wealth than any bank account ever could. Clara looked absolutely radiant, completely free from the heavy, toxic expectations of her past. I still drive my modest sedan from time to time, just to remind myself of where I came from and who I am. I still work as a consultant, helping small, local businesses grow their digital presence. But I also sit on the global board of the Vance Hospitality Syndicate now, using our family's immense resources to fund community housing projects, public libraries, and healthcare clinics across the state. Looking back on the entire journey, I realized the ultimate moral lesson of this experience. True wealth is not measured by the luxury hotel you dine in, the brand of the suit you wear, or the legal documents you use to protect your assets. True wealth is found strictly in the integrity of your soul, the kindness in your actions, and the way you treat your fellow human beings when you think nobody is watching. Richard Sterling tried to use a poverty clause to prove that I was nothing. In the end, that very piece of paper became the mirror that revealed his own moral bankruptcy to the entire world. He lost his empire, he lost his fortune, and most importantly, he lost his daughter, all because he couldn't understand that a person's value comes from their heart, not their wallet. Thank you for listening to our journey of justice and restoration. If this story reminded you to always stay humble and protect the ones you love, please leave a comment below, like the video, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories of emotional justice. Until next time, keep your feet on the ground, treat everyone with dignity, and remember that the quietest people often carry the heaviest truths. Stay safe and take care of each other.